Today on Bible Divas, you've got me, Jennifer Bischoff, Professor of New Testament, and Anna Siegespiel, Professor of Old Testament.
Yep, and today we are joined by Dr. Alexiana Fry to talk about trauma as a lens to understand the Bible better.
Dr. Alexiana Fry is guest researcher at the University of Copenhagen in Denmark, and she has a PhD in Hebrew Bible Old Testament. Her specialties are at the intersection of disciplines: feminism, migration diaspora studies, and trauma hermeneutics.
We hope you enjoy this conversation with Alexiana Fry.
Welcome to Bible Divas, a podcast from Baptist News Global, where four women Bible scholars bring curiosity, expertise, and a healthy dose of sass to conversations about Scripture. Whether you're certain, skeptical, deconstructing, reconstructing, or just curious, pull up a chair. The Bible Divas challenge assumptions, explore new perspectives, share a few laughs, and discover why this ancient book still matters today.
Hello. Today on Bible Divas, we have a special guest, Dr. Alexiana Fry.
That's me. Yes. Hello.
Yay! No, we're so excited to have you on today. This is going to be a great conversation. I'm really looking forward to it. But the first thing that we like to ask everybody who comes on is how you became a Bible scholar. Why?
That is a great question. And I think the hardest part about this whole conversation, and for any conversation I have ever, is trying to keep my thoughts concise. So I'm going to try. We're going to try to do this. I grew up in the church and I wanted to be a good girl, which requires knowing your Bible to an extent, right? Part of that also meant I, like a good girl, attended a Christian university. And that Christian university had Bible courses that were a requirement for graduation. You could not get out of Bible courses. Now, I was a worship arts major, so I already had to do a Bible minor, so fine. But I went into the program thinking, oh, I'll take those classes, that will be good, but I'm just going to get right through those. Music is really where I'm at. It's really interesting because I had never been taught any basic skills for Bible interpretation, for hermeneutics, until those courses. And those courses blew my mind. And that is at a conservative Christian university.
Right.
And I think what blew my mind really was I had struggled for so long to be a good girl, and I couldn't understand these words unless it was spoon-fed to me. These courses made what I had struggled with and wanted to enjoy entirely enjoyable. They really brought the worlds and words that I was taught to just savor actually edible. So yes, that is kind of what drew me to biblical studies. I, from there, went on, again, still in a conservative setting, to get my master's of divinity, because at that point I'm like, oh no, I hate this music stuff now. It's Bible. It's Bible. I want to do this. And it really was in part fueled by that passion of going, why was I not taught any of this ever? I grew up in the church. Why aren't these things taught to me? People deserve to know. People deserve to know. They deserve to have these tools. So to add to this, if those initial courses in undergrad blew my mind, the languages, you might as well have just incinerated my body, like fully on fire. Anyhow, all of which to say, what inspired me to study the Bible as a career was in part because of my adoration for these ancient worlds and peoples, but mostly because I was, upon finding out how cool this ancient world and these ancient people were, I was peeved that I had to go to college to learn these things. And that so many people in church settings were not taught these skills. Even if we're getting like Bible diva-y, I watched my mother and grandmother attend women's Bible studies weekly, faithfully. And they had those books. And reading those materials was actually incredibly upsetting because it presumed that they would only want to understand Bible information if it was spoon-fed in a particular way alongside a recipe with floral cursive script. And it felt so paternalizing and patronizing. Like, just, really? Is that all you think women are? And you're going to keep it like this? Anyhow, all of which to say, I've always wanted people to know what I know and what I feel so lucky to have gotten to know. And that's why I do what I do.
You've got to tell us.
That's what I like.
Yeah, no, that's great. You got to tell us about like one of your aha moments. Like you're in class and then like they brought something up and you're like, how is it that I never heard this before?
Oh, gosh. I think what was so interesting, this is so simple. It's like the grasping God's word is the textbook that I was given in those classes. And it was that like, what do they call it? The principalizing bridge.
Yes.
And all of those
the interpretive
things.
Journey. And then you have that bridge.
Yes. Like these interpretive journeys.
Yes.
Even that as an undergraduate, just wait. So I've been reading the Bible and I've not known any of this background content. And how do I access this background content? And finding out that you can. Yeah. What was, I think, the most mind-blowing, actually, it still is one of the most mind-blowing pieces of information that I learned. It was actually upon translating in the book of Jonah. So it was more into my graduate studies when I had like my more like, moments. When the whale swallows Jonah, the whale, after Jonah is inside the womb or the belly of the whale or the fish or whatever it is, after that, the fish has a feminine suffix added to the end. Like the fish is seen as this like pregnant entity based on just the grammar of the
gender.
That's not something you would think or even see. It's just whale and whale or fish or whatever you're going to call it in whatever translation. And I'm going, there's a whole gender shift here that they're trying to do. And they're trying to, like, Jonah gets birthed. He gets puked. He's going through rebirth. This is incredible. And most of my wild aha moments really happened with translation. Mm-hmm. I became really deeply problematic. I would do my devotions with a commentary side by side, and I would definitely like look down upon people who didn't do that. Like, I know more than you. Anyway, yeah.
Oh, that's great. I love that.
I'm doing this right.
Yeah, you were. You had your commentary with you. Oh, that's good stuff.
By the way, that interpretive journey stuff, it stuck in my head. And basically, it's just telling students that there's a meaning in their town in the past, right? Yes. And you have to figure out what it meant to them. Yep. But then you got to find like a bridge that kind of takes you into our world. And that's like so simple, but it's something that people don't talk about in church.
No.
So.
Yeah. No. And it's funny because I feel like in church settings, we're always talking about what's the original meaning, as if that's like super easy and accessible to do. Like even the little infographic where it's like, this is what it means over here, and it's going to cross over here, and that's how you can do this. I'm like, well, it's a little more complicated than that, but I understand why you don't get into the weeds with undergrads about how tricky that is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Absolutely. We're going to talk about your work, but I think we have to lay a little bit of a foundation. Mm-hmm. You do a lot of work in trauma-informed study of the Bible. That's called Other Things. If you want to give us the other names to it, that would be fine. But can you tell us about what that is? What is trauma-informed study of the Bible?
Yeah, they call it trauma hermeneutics.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So fancy.
It is.
It's so fancy. All of which to say, there is no one version of a trauma hermeneutic. When one person says trauma hermeneutic, they might do it differently than someone else. And that, I think, has lent itself to the folks doing trauma hermeneutics right now. We're in a bit of we're figuring it out. We're figuring it out and going, okay, we need to maybe lay down some parameters because it's a little too loosey-goosey. Because in some cases, trauma can become a synonym for folks of just saying, oh, I'm pointing out that that person is suffering. But if I can boil it down, a trauma-informed reading of the Bible uses tools from trauma theories, which trauma theories itself could be from sociology. It could be from psychology. There's literary trauma theories. So there's multiple disciplines and fields even within the bucket, right? So it's confusing in part because it is. We have to be a lot more clear about what we're doing and when we're doing it. But you use trauma theory to attempt to make sense of the text from a different perspective in a nutshell. And I'd argue that it's super beneficial even for folks who would cry anachronism, which we love to do that, because it doesn't just state the what of the text, right? Which is a lot of what historical critical work does. It goes, this is what it is. Thank you. That's helpful. However, it builds on that foundation. We still need to know that stuff. That's really important. It builds on that foundation to also answer why. The why behind the what. Why was that done? Why was that needed to be said? It also answers the so what of a text, as well as really, and I think this is the most important point, it discusses impact. I would also say that I believe a trauma-informed perspective takes seriously the persons behind as well as the characters within a text. It acknowledges that they are human. And it also acknowledges that we readers are human, and that involves a whole slew of emotions and ideologies and histories. So trauma hermeneutics is tricky, but it's also not in its own paradoxical way. Yeah.
Well, I really liked oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I just think so much of, well, probably the New Testament as well, but certainly the Hebrew Bible, arose from traumatic experiences. And so I think that it's so helpful to pay attention to that, especially when you're trying to maybe like course correct some kind of, I don't know, some kind of an idea that maybe many of us got growing up that like, oh, God wrote the Bible. And then to kind of be like, okay, well then trauma, well, let's not ask that question.
Yeah.
But yeah, instead you're asking like, okay, well, tell me if I'm wrong, because I don't do trauma studies, but you're kind of asking the question of like, the people who wrote it, did they experience trauma?
Yes.
The people who were shaping it later, did they also? And then me as a person, I also.
Yes, okay. Exactly. And I think what's so interesting about what you just said is, some of the work I do is in the book of Ezekiel. God does depict themselves as traumatized in a lot of ways. If you shift your perspective, even if you want to maintain that, what happens when you do see your God affected by what's happening in the world and what's happening with those he's in relationship with, et cetera, et cetera. So what do we do with a traumatized deity? And that even goes not just for God, the Father, or whatever we want. I don't know.
It's okay. None of us are comfortable with that language.
I don't love it. But that also goes with Jesus, right? To be blunt, like most of the Christian faith is founded upon a horrifyingly traumatic event. So we maybe need to know some of these things. It would be good for us.
Yeah, I like sort of your specific definition that you have. So we're going to talk about your newest book, but your first book, Trauma Talks in the Hebrew Bible, Speech Act Theory and Trauma Hermeneutics. There's your term, trauma hermeneutics. Yeah, you have this great way of describing it as movement through the middle of the thick. And I kind of wanted to hear you talk about that. Like, how does that phrase characterize your approach to biblical interpretation and what you're doing in the book and beyond?
Yeah. That's a really good question. And I'm glad that you think it is smart and good, because there are sometimes I read my past work and I go, what am I even saying? But I will break it kind of down with those keywords, the through, the middle, and the thick, but I'll work backwards. So we'll start with thick. And thick really comes from, this is so hard, and I'm sure you can relate. I grew up reading words, but not really hearing them. And especially even with names. So I pronounce things wrong all the time. Anyway,
right.
thick is part of Clifford Geertz. I think it's Geertz. Don't know. Thick description, which I'm also going to bastardize and play with a little bit. I don't know if I'm allowed to say bastardize. I said
You are fine.
Okay, excellent. A thin description is more like just stating the obvious. It's like a surface level fact. So that person is waving. But a thick description is going to interpret the wave based on different layers of meaning, right? There's thickness here. So there's a wave in this instance might mean, do you hear me? Do you see me? Am I coming through on Zoom? Or maybe based on culture or intention or emotions. There are so many factors that can add to what the actual meaning of a wave is, right? Mm-hmm. So a thick description involves layers, what Geertz calls webs of significance, that we need to sift through and interpret in order to go beyond just the bare facts into meaning. And meaning is always constructed and multiple and difficult. So not only should trauma be a layer that I think should be considered in that thickness and that thick description, and I do believe that is often missed in interpretation, but I think we also need to recognize that trauma does impact context, culture, it impacts, not only is it itself a layer, but also impacts the other layers, right? Mm-hmm. And we also have our own layers that are part of how we interpret, right? Maybe I'm waving and one of you are sitting there going, why is she? Maybe you had a bad experience with a wave. I don't know, right? Like meaning is thick, it is difficult, and especially when it comes to speech, which is part of my first book, there's so much room for misinterpretation, which I'm, as us three Bible scholars in here, that's sort of our bread and butter. Anyhow, texts are also thick in that they are inherently polyvalent because of all of those layers. And sometimes we only stick with one layer. Sometimes we do too many. Anyhow, thick. Middle does actually come from Christian theologian Shelley Rambo, where she discusses the middle as the space, or if we want to keep using that layer language, the space or the layer that kind of describes trauma. She calls it, quote, the figurative site in which death and life are no longer bounded, the perplexing space of survival. And she actually talks about the middle in light of Good Friday and Holy Saturday being that middle cushion. Like we need to sit in Holy Saturday instead of rushing through it. Even though we are going to go through it, there is going to be a resurrection, but we often ignore Holy Saturday. Easter's coming. I'm getting an Easter basket, right? Anyhow. So we often rush through the middle. We even ignore it. Sometimes we can also get stuck in the middle. Dominic LaCapra is a historian who often talks about trauma, and he argues that one should and must move away from sort of acting out or compulsively processing our trauma not processing, actually, it's the opposite. Acting out our trauma, which is our body's way of trying to process it. And we need to work through it, which means to process it, to mourn it, in which he argues, quote, restores the distinction between the past, the present, and the future. And it allows for political agency. It allows for us to go, that trauma is here and I am here. It doesn't need to be all encapsulated and all consuming. I know this was probably a lot of word salad here, but this does kind of still today characterize my approach to biblical interpretation for multiple reasons. In acknowledging that there is a thick description, I'm also trying to acknowledge that the perspective that I'm offering is definitely not the only one. and not the only valid one even, right? I might get it wrong. There might be multiple realities, multiple interpretations, even paradoxical ones that are true at once. There are so many layers, and I do believe they are deeply interconnected. And the point in acknowledging trauma is not to leave one stranded there in the middle, but to ask what it means to move through it, even as we are reading about it and there's nothing we can do about what happened then, right? Mm. I am all about recognizing that readers are part of the interpretation process and that words can affect us. Can. Not always, but can. So my approach is an attempt at being holistic. It's about holding humility and complexity as best I can, which means this whole rigmarole is not super clear at times. But I do hope, and I think I got a little bit better from book 1 to book 2. So we'll see if maybe book 3 gets better from there. You know, future's looking bright.
I just love that description because you're putting those like different disciplines together in not even a whole sentence. It's like a phrase, right? So you're taking that speech act theory and you probably have a little bit of feminist theory behind it and then with trauma studies. So yeah, well done.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, well, it's exciting and it's also really complicated. I mean, I guess I can kind of see what you mean by like it gets muddy. It's really hard to nail down, especially when you get interdisciplinary like that.
Oh, yes.
So tell us a little bit about what took you from that book to your next book, Esther Keeps the Score. Why Esther? What was it about that story, tradition that made you think, yeah, this is where I'm going next?
Well, part of why Esther was not a choice. So when I started my postdoc, I was asked to explore books of the Bible that had explicit diaspora settings as a part of their book.
Okay.
And
will you explain what diaspora is?
Yes. Well, that's another one of those crunchy words.
Yes, but yeah, just it doesn't have to. You don't have to be complicated about. Well, you probably do.
Well,
just do it.
The way that I think most of us understand diaspora is that a group of people with origins, which I'm origins in quotation marks, in one place, do not live in that place. And we'll get into that. We'll get into that. So I think that's fascinating in part because much of the Bible is that. Mm-hmm. And to be blunt, much of life is that, right? So there is a level, diaspora studies is also having it's a whole thing. There are schools of thought within diaspora studies. There are people even critiquing the ones that I love, and we are still parsing out certain things. But diaspora even itself is a Greek word and it means scattered.
Nice.
So it means that you have been dispersed.
Gotcha.
Yes.
Okay, so when you started your postdoc then, you had to do diaspora.
Yes. And I said, okay, I'm a Judges girly. I'm a Deuteronomistic history girly. That's my home. Okay, that's not where I have expertise. Where would you like me to go then? And my boss said, how about Esther and Ezekiel? And I said, all right. Because if you are a good girl growing up in the church, you are familiar with Esther. You are deeply acquainted with Esther. And I've been running away from Esther for a very long time. Did not want to, no. So yeah, that is how I stumbled upon Esther again in my life. I am so glad. I am beyond glad. There is nothing like having encountered a very well-trodden, very familiar to you story, and then re-experiencing it again at a different stage in your life. Now re-experiencing it with my Hebrew Bible schools, guess same difference, I guess. And with some of the hermeneutics and skills that I had, as soon as I started translating through the book, I'm sitting there going, there's got to be work on this involving trauma. There's got to be a ton of stuff on this, because this is a hot, fresh bed of mess. This is gnarly. This is not the VeggieTale version that I grew up with. So I was assigned Esther, did not choose it, and yet I'm so glad it chose me. And I got lucky because there wasn't a lot of trauma-informed writing on the Book of Esther. There are pieces, but they are mainly relegated to 2 segments of the book itself. So either you are writing about chapter 2 and the mass trafficking event, and Esther as part of that mass trafficking event, or you are talking about the final chapters of the book. So it's really interesting because when I was writing my first book, I felt like I was trudging through mud. Writing this book felt like it was the easiest thing to do. It felt easy. And I've not experienced that thus far in my career. So I will take it. I don't expect to have that anymore. But I feel really, really lucky that all worked out.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. So as I was reading through parts of your book, you mentioned that different scholars have characterized Esther in different ways. So like sometimes, you'll know this better than me, but like sometimes she's devious and other times she's just kind of milquetoast, like just depending on who's reading it, right?
Yes.
And so, yeah, if you want to walk us through some of the ways like various scholars have characterized Esther, and then what I want to get to is why you landed on this kind of fawn response as characterizing Esther really well.
Yeah. So it's really interesting because I feel like there are so many misconceptions about Esther in general in the book. And a lot of them have to do with really binary perspectives on the characters, on their actions inside of them. Just as an aside, can you hear the honking car that is going off?
I could only barely hear it.
It just finished. Okay. Excellent.
And
Great.
so where were you? You were at
binary interpretations. So yeah, Esther, especially as a feminist biblical scholar, she is either adored, like this girl can do no wrong, heroine, perfect creature, God sent, everything is good. Or she is the worst creature to have ever. Why didn't she just Vashti up the place? Vashti is the real heroine. And to be fair, Vashti is a queen. Was. Sorry, babes. But she is either loved or hated. She is seen as either a heroine or a foot soldier of the patriarchy, right? And that is in part because of her actions in the book. And to be really fair to people who interpret in one way or another, one of the things I really love about Hebrew Esther is how much it leaves open for speculation. There's not a lot of comment, at least moral or emotional commentary on a lot of actions that are happening and a lot of things that are going on. It kind of leaves it up to the reader. And I think that is so brilliant. I think it's brilliant, but is also deeply uncomfortable because when there's ambiguity, we rush to fill it. Now, I am taking advantage of that ambiguity and going, is she a foot soldier of the patriarchy, or has she experienced way too much trauma in her life, right? She's an orphan. She's then taken from, so in one instance, she's literally in the text says she is taken for Mordecai. And then she's taken again to the women's houses in the palace. In the span of one verse, that happens. She is an orphan. She then goes through a year-long process of what I'm calling grooming. It's grooming. This is not, and again, interpreters, she's just having spa days and spa treatments. She's just fully Persian, and there's nothing we can do about it. She's just so obsessed with herself. Not to mention the fact that this is probably a deeply traumatized teenager.
Right.
Anyway, people like to hate on my girl Esther, and in part for decent reasons. But I read her as enacting the fawn response because what I saw her do, and many scholars also saw her doing things that what they call pragmatic. They saw it as deeply pragmatic, deeply like this is calculated. And it is. It is absolutely calculated. I also thought it was compulsive. Having experienced all the things that she had, I also have a whole section where I outline how often Esther is called pleasing and how often she seeks to be pleasing to, like, literally she is Tove. She is, if it is Tove in your eyes, if I am Tove in your eyes, how often she is obedient to Mordecai. I think what's one of the things that I do, however, concede is the reason why I read Esther as the archetype, honestly, of fawn is because I saw myself in Esther. How am I going to get through this and not, I don't know, die? Ooh, well, it's going to take a lot of thinking on my feet and a lot of not thinking at all of myself. I need to just be hyper vigilant to all of my surroundings, to figuring out what makes each of these people tick, how I can just move these pieces just so. And again, people call that manipulative. In a way, it is. When you fawn, you appease the threat or please the threat so as to not, I don't know, be eaten by the threat. So are you manipulating the threat in a way? Sure, but you're also not going to die. So right. It's complicated. It's deeply complicated. But yeah, I read Esther as a master fawner because I understand that in my own life. And so I read Esther as I read myself. And I can't really claim anything else there.
Resonate with that so much. I grew up evangelical like you.
We're taught to do that.
We're taught to do that. And if you want to succeed at all, if you want anybody to listen to you, even just a little bit, like you have to do that fawning thing. So yes, I totally relate to that.
Yep. Yeah. I have to be a Proverbs 31 woman, which isn't actually what the Proverbs 31 woman in the text is. It's a it's a different version. And it actually shifts depending on your context, right? I'm sure that my Midwest Proverbs 31 girl was very different than other areas in the world, but whew, yeah. Yep.
Very much enjoyed your, sorry, I'm just totally talking over you, Anna, but
you're doing great. Go for it.
Jump in a second. I've enjoyed your little videos. I guess they're mostly on Instagram, but maybe they're TikTok. I don't know.
Both.
Well, you're going through Esther, right? Like that. It's just like, it's like a commentary, really helpful. And so I wonder how you've been able to use social media to get the message about Esther out, to talk about your book, to, get your scholarship out there. I want to hear a little bit more about that.
Social media is both wonderful and a hellscape all in one. Oh, deeply disturbing. I started posting on social media about, 5 years ago in 2021. And I actually started because my dissertation was on Judges 19. And I was like, okay, I want to provide educational materials, right? That is something I'm very passionate about. So how do I inform the public about all of the different dynamics of Judges 19? And I literally called it the Texts of Terror series. And I have a little jingle and it's very obnoxious. And now that I have more followers, people are like, can you stop singing? And then there are other people who are like, I love the song, need more song.
I love the song.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Sometimes when people comment that, I'm like, listen, I also post these on YouTube, and one one video. So you only have to listen to the song once. That's fine. You don't have to listen to it every day until you get through it. You can listen to it once. If you're annoyed by the song, just 15 seconds in, it's fine. Anyhow, I started with a Text of Terror series in which I, verse by verse, sometimes word by word, went through Judges 19, which of course I had like 3 followers for years. And it was just easy for me when I started to think about how do I share my scholarship on Esther, because this is what I'm doing. Well, I just do the Text of Terror. I just do what I've always done. And yeah, I do kind of see it as my living commentary in a kind of way, very much so that. So thank you for calling it that. I've always wanted to write a commentary. And so I'll take it. Yeah. Yeah. But that is, social media has been really fun for the book process. Very fun.
And tell us really quickly where we can find you on social media.
Oh, okay. I am on Instagram and TikTok. I'm also now on the YouTubes, but I barely know what I'm doing over there. Barely know. But most of all of my content you can find on all of those pages, and it's very easily accessible. I hope it's easily accessible. If it's not, I'm upset, but yes.
Nice. This has been great. The other thing I want to get into, so the end of Esther, yeah, as you work through the book about like her being a fawning character, I love that. It's harder because I can identify with that. And just like you said, you can too. What's harder is kind of what you call the revenge fantasy that happens at the end. And I wonder if you could talk to us a little bit about how that revenge fantasy is functioning or how it harms people, things like that.
Yeah, yeah. I will say because there has been trauma-informed work that has been done brilliantly on specific parts, some of the brilliant pieces that have been done on trauma and Esther are done about these final chapters. 2 pieces in particular that I need to highlight. Sarah Emanuel has a article, as well as Stephanie Day Powell, and both of them are in a open access journal called The Bible and Critical Theory. Sarah Emanuel's piece really kicked off a lot of this for me. She does read it as a revenge fantasy, as well as recognizing that the revenge fantasy has a sinister side. So the revenge fantasy for many folks who are wrestling with trauma is very normal. It's super, super natural. One of the main things that victims feel when they are affected by trauma is a feeling of powerlessness. And the person that has power in those instances is the perpetrator, right? And revenge fantasies, inevitably, one becomes the perpetrator. And so in a way, it actually, although it feels like it might restore power to the powerless feeling, it actually harms self-image in a way, because then they see themselves as a perpetrator, right? And there's also a little bit of nuance to hold there, because if we hold a binary that says victims must be pure and innocent and perfect and they can do no wrong, as well as saying that perpetrators must be wholly other and monstrous and evil, we are not actually getting to the heart of what is truly affecting our world on a day-to-day basis, right? And people, I think this is also part of the brilliance of Esther, because it really clearly shows this. People can simultaneously be victims as well as victimizers. That can change hands. Now, there are certain folks who believe because it's a revenge fantasy, it is harmless. But I do challenge that a little bit. I do challenge that. And I think, especially, I'll say this really clearly, trauma-informed work should be very explicitly about anti-oppression, about stopping harm. It is not just pointing out, hey, this is bad, and this is suffering, and this is hard. It is about going, okay, and how does it stop happening? So for me, at the end of the book, maybe is it a revenge fantasy? Because historically we know these events did not occur, right?
Right.
Esther is not a historical book per se. Now, the line between fact and fiction in ancient works is always a little blurry and messy. But historically, we have no record that there was necessarily a genocide, especially of the Jewish folks in Persia, that we know of, right? That we know of. We could find out something later on down the road that changes that. And that's some of the beauty of our field, as well as some of the difficulty of our field. We could get a new manuscript tomorrow that says X, Y, and Z, and we go, okay, what do we do now? But Esther is not historical, so the revenge fantasy is a way for the powerless to feel powerful momentarily. And yet, what does that do? What does that do? Is there a way for us to understand power differently, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think what's hard, especially if you think about what trauma can do to folks, is that it can narrow vision. It can make it difficult to imagine that there is another way of existing in the world other than violence and harm and struggle. And so, yeah, for me, at the end, is it a revenge fantasy? Maybe. And yet, I do think we need to very clearly say that while on 13 Adar, it's incredibly violent and horrible, most scholars actually will argue that all of what happens at the end of the book is self-defense. 13 Adar, there is maybe an argument for that. 14 Adar, and this is where, right, the fawn response becomes really interesting. Esther is asked what she wants from the king, from the king. What are conjunctions? Prepositions. Mercy. And she asks for another day of the same. But there are so many questions that we have about that. Why would she ask for that? And so on one level, it could be she is considering in that moment, what will please my king and make him happy right now? Mm. Well, the king has not had a problem with mass death throughout the entirety of the book. So, hey, let's do this. Keep me more safe, please. And I think it is important, again, when we talk about pure victims and monstrous perpetrators, sometimes our trauma responses do cause us to do things that we wouldn't morally agree with. And even fawners, when they people please, they might appease behaviors or even enact their own behaviors that they wouldn't personally agree with. And yet they do because they do. However, there is also an avenue in which to see that maybe she's not fawning at all. Maybe now that she does have an iota or modicum of power that she feels like the fight response is available to her and she does go for that, right? And so it is important, I think, at the end of the book to name what we see at the very least on 14 Adar as genocide. But also to get behind the so what and the impact again. Many folks do hesitate. Sorry if you heard the motorcycle. Many folks do hesitate to call it that because it can easily slip into anti-Semitic interpretation so fast, so fast, especially a lot of work done on the Hebrew Bible and in the Hebrew Bible just rides that line. And it's just really abhorrent. Sure. So I think, again, it's important to name what we are seeing while also going, don't do that. Don't do that with your interpret. You can say that this happened while also don't do that. So it's important to be clear while acknowledging multiplicity. Revenge fantasy or not, we are seeing a lot of victimizer, victim, perpetrator, power changing hands, the cycle continuing on in the book very vividly. And there is kind of a beauty in that as well. I know that sounds horrible, but there is a beauty in seeing it so vividly and so clearly.
It gives us the truth of what we do as humans, right?
Right. Yep.
Yeah,
and I think
exactly what
with the ambiguity at the end too, it begs the question, was this good? Is this good or is this bad? And for what reasons? Is this showing me that this is the cycle and I can actually choose to end it?
Mm.
That's what I hope for at the very least.
I
Yeah.
love that. I love that so much. Yeah, ending that cycle. And I love that you point out that it's a natural response, right? To have that revenge fantasy
Oh
is
my
not
gosh, yes.
unusual.
No,
Um,
not at all.
but it is something worth fighting against.
Yeah. Well, in part because it is a coping mechanism to stop us from processing the grief that we are truly feeling. It's grief.
Mm.
It's grief and mourning. Judith Herman is one of the mothers of this field. And Judith Herman describes it again as very normal and natural, but it is a impediment upon stopping people from mourning and processing and grieving. It stops the process. It doesn't help. It can even regress the process. So, yeah.
Thank you so much for all this talking about Esther and trauma studies. And I hope people will check out your new book, Esther Keeps the Score. You can get it anywhere, right?
You can.
Good. Thank you so much for this conversation.
No, it's been fun. I love being a diva with fellow divas.
Yes. Thank you for divaing with us.
I feel like we should give people like some sort of badge or something.
We need to make
I'm now
pins.
a Bible
I'm
diva.
giving more like sash.
Oh, a sash.
Ooh,
I love
come
this idea.
on.
Okay.
Yeah, upgrade.
That's great.
Sash it is.
I think that's wonderful. Well, yeah, thank you so much for coming on with us. This has been a great conversation.
It has been my pleasure. Thank you.
This has been another change-making conversation from Baptist News Global. The episode you've just heard is part of a special podcast series called Bible Divas. Be sure to follow B&G Daily at baptistnews.com and subscribe to get notifications about future episodes. Baptist News Global is a national nonprofit news service that is independent, free, and faithful. B&G is supported by readers and listeners like you. Learn more at baptistnews.com.
This episode was produced and edited by Mac Bowles of TKG Communications, LLC, Dallas, Texas.